Welcome to the Fiskars Scissors Tool School. Specifically, this month is a National Sewing Month. So this presentation will focus on sewing scissors. In this presentation, over the next about 45 minutes, you're going to learn about all the different kinds of scissors that Fiskars makes, what makes them tick, and how you can keep them at their peak. Now, sewing does have a lot of different tasks involved, and there are scissors that might do better than others in certain tasks. So hopefully what you learn along the way, you'll be able to go back to your stash and understand what tools might be right for the sewing tasks that you've got ahead of you. So to begin, quick introduction. My name is Dan Cunningham. I am an engineer at Fiskars. We're located in Wisconsin, and we do a lot of the design and manufacturing of the scissors that you see on the shelves at Michael's. And as a veteran of about 13 years at Fiskars, I've had my hands in a lot of those different products. So not just on the scissors side, but also, if you know, Fiskars also makes some garden tools. I've had my hands in those as well. But Fiskars has been making sharp metal objects for 370-ish years. So they've got some pretty interesting things to do with what would normally appear to be a pretty simple tool, the scissors. So at the end of this presentation, we'll have some time for some questions, but along the way, feel free and add them to the chat. Tiffany's, my coworker here, should be able to tackle some of those, but otherwise at the end, we'll be able to have somebody will read those to me and I'll be able to answer them in more detail. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing, when you think about scissors, you might think, well, scissors, they're really simple. There's 3 parts, right? So if I pick up this pair of scissors, it's got handles, it's got blades, and it's got a joint. You know, what is there? You know, how much engineering can we put into this, and why are there an entire wall of scissors at Michael's? Why are there so many different versions? Well, let me be a little more detail. Even though there are 3 parts to it, each of those 3 parts of the scissors can have many different things done to them from an engineering standpoint to make them better at one task, but maybe not as good at another task. So understanding the things that we do to a pair of scissors, we as engineers, will help you to understand when one scissor might be more suited for a certain sewing or cutting task than another. So we might have scissors that have longer or shorter blades, or stainless steel blades, or forged blades, or coated blades, or sharper blades. That's just blades. Handles could be plastic, they could be metal, they could be left-handed, right-handed, ambidextrous, they could have texture, they could have non-stick. Again, those are all different things just from the handles. And the joints, well, that's just a screw, right? There's a lot of things that we can do with the joint to improve the performance of scissors. So the first thing as engineers that we think about when we're going to go about designing a new scissors is, what is it that you're trying to do with these scissors? What is the consumer trying to cut in general? And we can bucket those into a couple easy buckets. They might be, you know, one bucket is you're cutting thick materials. Those might be your garage scissors, or your kitchen scissors, maybe for cutting open packaging. You might be generally cutting sticky stuff. There might be a type of scissor that is best for that. Or you just want some inexpensive scissors that you could kind of have around, have a handful of that you can throw in your junk drawer. Those are some categories that we do design some scissors for, but we're not going to talk about today. Because again, it's National Sewing Month this month. We're specifically going to focus on fabric cutting scissors here today. Now, in general, those fabric scissors are going to be the higher performing scissors. Not always more expensive, but sometimes more expensive for the technologies inside them. But they're generally going to have to be higher performing because cutting fabric is actually pretty tough. There's a wide variety of fabrics, and you want a pair of scissors that can do most things and not have to think about it. So that's where we get a variety, but at the same time, they're generally kind of these higher performing pairs of scissors. Now, when I say Fiskars, and probably when you came to this school, you probably had one thing in mind, and that's that classic orange handled scissors. I mean, these are classic for a reason. My grandmother had a pair and I inherited them. I have them at my desk out in the office, and they still cut like new. They are high quality scissors made in such a way that they will last a really long time at a reasonable price. We call these our classic, and they are more specifically an 8-inch pair of scissors, and they have bent handles. So they are our classic 8-inch bent. Now, within an 8-inch bent pair of scissors, you can have other varieties. In fact, everything I'm showing here pretty much is an 8-inch bent pair of scissors. So why are there so many different varieties? And that's where we can start to focus in, like I described at the beginning, on there are going to be some scissors that are better at doing tasks than others. So the next step is to start to understand what are those things that the engineers do to these scissors to make them better at certain tasks. And I like to say that we include, excuse me, different technologies inside these scissors. And by technology, I don't mean like computers or anything like that. I'm talking about engineering tricks that we can do to those 3 simple features of a pair of scissors to make them better at certain things. Sometimes those technologies come at a cost. Sometimes it's a higher retail price. Sometimes it's maybe not as good at doing certain other things, but all of these technologies that we put inside are improving certain things. So to start, let's talk about some of these technologies. And you might, in a lot of cases, see these technologies called out on packaging. You might see the word razor edge. That's the first one we're going to talk about, is a product that has a razor edge. What does that mean? Fiskars puts razor edge on scissors that we tend to recommend for fabric cutting. But why is that? Well, let's look into more detail. Excuse me. First, these 8-inch classic pairs of scissors are designed with what we call an all-purpose edge, cutting edge. The cutting edges of a pair of scissors are part of the blades, and they are specifically added to the blade in order to make them sharper. And they're not just a square edge. Now, kids' scissors, oftentimes they have a edge with just not much of an angle at all. They have just kind of a nice sharp corner, but they're pretty flat. But with Fiskars standard all-purpose scissors, we have what's called the standard angle, in that the angle that we cut the edge of that scissors to is about 30 degrees. That 30-degree angle does 2 things. One, it sharpens it more than just a square edge so that you can cut fabrics or softer things or cut paper with them in a very consistent way that does successfully cut through with no burrs and without having too much force to cut. The second thing it does, though, is it actually gives increased durability over, say, a knife edge. If you had a knife, which was a very, very steep angle, that's like 80 degrees, it's very sharp, and you tried to do a lot of cutting with that, eventually that would wear down. It would dull quicker. And in most of our scissors, we have to cycle test these on our robotic test machines in our office to at least 50,000 cycles. You know, sometimes it's 100,000 cycles that we have to make sure these things stay sharp. So that 30-degree angle, our standard all-purpose angle, is a great angle to have a nice durable edge that will stand up to the occasional rough treatment potentially. You hear the adage of, oh, my sewing scissors doesn't cut paper. If you cut paper with sewing scissors, it'll dull the edge. Typically that is not true for the all-purpose edges. That's more true, still only partially true, with what is called the razor edge. Now, razor edge takes that standard 30-degree angle and sharpens it even further. That very sharp angle, now it's at a 45-degree angle. And that 45-degree angle, you can kind of see it if I open this up and show the reflection of this blade in the shininess. That whole top edge is now at a sharper 45-degree angle, which we call a razor edge. That 45-degree angle does 2 things as well. One, it makes it sharper than the standard all-purpose edge, which will then get through material that might be really sheer. It might be that very delicate material which you need to have a sharper edge. It might make a cleaner cut, one that is more consistent, less jagged. That razor edge will allow you to get through that material in a much cleaner way because it's a sharper edge. Now, the second thing it does, which may not be as advantageous, was because it's a sharper edge, it also is a little more prone to damage. It doesn't have as much material behind it to support that edge. So while it'll be a sharper, cleaner cut, if you use the razor edge scissors on more abrasive materials, which, construction paper included, white paper's not too abrasive, but if you do a lot of cutting with like copy paper, it can tend to dull it faster than an all-purpose edge. So like I mentioned, the adage of, hey, keep your sewing scissors for fabric and your other scissors for paper, that's a good idea. But I will also say that our razor edges are tested to be a sharp edge for a very long time. So if you occasionally cut paper with it, it's not going to ruin it right away. It will still function very well for a very long time, but it'll also do much better on those shearer fabrics. So normally we actually write razor edge right underneath Fiskars on the scissors that have that razor edge. So that way you know right on there what that razor edge is intended for, and it's that fabric. And now, leaving this class, hopefully you'll kind of understand that that 30-degree standard angle, that's a good universal angle, and that razor edge is great for trimming fabrics. So that's the first technology. Second technology that we talk about is another that you might see on packaging, which is called Amplify. So Amplify is a technology that helps improve performance of another problem. It's not the jaggedness of maybe a standard edge on a sheer fabric. Amplify is kind of a flip side. If you are cutting material, especially multiple layers of material that are a little bit tougher, sometimes what can happen, let me switch cameras here. Sometimes what can happen is that as you're cutting this fabric, this is an example of some fabric, just standard cotton. As you make the cut, the fabric, especially towards the tip, folds between the blades. And what I mean by that is the blades tend to spread apart. And due to the force of that cut, and I'm going to force this here because these are sharp, so it tends then that fabric folds between the blades without cutting. Now, a general sharp pair of scissors won't do that. It'll cut just fine through, but especially if you've got multiple layers or a fabric that might be extra tough, sometimes that can have more occurrence than you'd think. So what we've invented is called the Amplify. The Amplify pair of scissors is a scissor that has a special technology built inside. It's built into the joint of this handle that helps the scissor detect when it's just about to spread the blades open, and it pushes them harder together. This is an automatic thing and you don't feel it happening, but the engineering inside it allows those blades to get pushed together better than a regular pair of scissors, and it's that special blade. So if I go back to this angle, or this camera angle, what happens is as you have extra force pushing the two, this joint built in right here allows the two blades to squeeze themselves together and prevent the blades from splaying apart. So these Amplify tools, which in this case, this one actually shows its razor edge as well. This Amplify razor edge will do a great job of completing all of those cuts without having any issues of material folding between the blades. And so here's that demonstration of that Amplify. We call it the torsion bar, and it allows those two blades to push themselves back together. So the next time you see the word Amplify on a Fiskars scissor packaging, you can remember, ooh, it's amplifying. What is it amplifying? It's amplifying the ability for the scissors to keep the blades together, for them never to spread apart and miss a cut. So it's a cool technology that comes in a couple sizes around the web, but Michaels carries a 8-inch pair of Amplify scissors, just that standard 8-inch that we like. And it's great to do kind of some of those, especially if there's extra layers, lots of layers, or stuff fabrics that tend to give you some trouble when they spread open like that. The next technology that we're going to talk about is called Easy Action. So this is another technology that we put on packaging that may by itself not perfectly describe what's going on. So I'm going to demonstrate a situation where Easy Action is going to help you. Say, for instance, you have a lot of cutting to do. You're not going to use a rotary cutter. You're cutting out a fabric pattern, and you have denim, or you've got something that might be a little tougher to cut with, and maybe you're a little less hand strength than the average person. Could be from getting older. I mean, I'm 40 at this point, and I'm feeling the age, or potentially you've got arthritis, and your muscles become a little weaker than they used to. Now, as you're doing lots and lots of cutting, you start to feel fatigue in your arm. And that's because you're doing a lot of closing and a lot of reopening of your hands. What Easy Action does is it takes away one of those tasks. I said you have to close your hand and then you have to open your hand. And that repetitive action of the closing and opening gives you fatigue, especially when you think about your closing muscle. That's a pretty strong muscle. That's your lower forearm here. That's pretty strong. But the opening action, that's the muscle across the back of your arm. That's not as strong. Weaker muscles are often the first to become painful, and especially when you're using them in repetitive ways. So the Easy Action describes the mechanism of a spring that helps to reopen the scissor after you close it. So you use your strong muscle to close the scissor, and then you don't have to use your weak muscle to reopen the scissor. So in this way, you can go for a longer period without fatigue. You don't feel the burn of your arm being sore because you're only using half those muscles. There is another advantage of having a spring in a pair of scissors and that might be obvious from the fact that the handles of these look a little different. And that big change is these have loops and these don't have loops. Normally, when you open a pair of scissors, you have to put your fingers through loops so that they can feel you opening them, so they can be pushed open. But when you have a spring, you don't need those loops, which generally results in something that is more comfortable to hold, more comfortable to grab, easier to pick up, and especially those with joints that might be sore or knuckles that might be inflamed. Rheumatoid arthritis or regular arthritis can cause that. You don't have to slip your fingers into loops anymore. A tool like this, you can just reach around it and be able to actuate it in a much more comfortable way. So we make large, this is kind of the 8-inch size. We make a smaller snip, and compared to a classic 8-inch, you can see this is a pretty small one. And this also has a spring with a lock that you slide right back, and now it just opens and closes. And this is more for more delicate cutting, maybe some fussy cutting where you're cutting out a design out of fabric. And again, this is that same small squeeze, and then it pushes it open for you. But you can use your whole hand for this because you don't have to fit your hand in loops. So this is very handy, that Easy Action, that's describing the spring that's built into a lot of scissors. There's another technology which is related to this one, which is called tabletop cutting. Now, what does that mean, tabletop? You might have noticed that compared to a regular 8-inch pair of scissors, this has quite a bit of angle to it. What is this offset all about? And that offset has to do with the action of actually cutting on a tabletop. If I were to take an 8-inch regular classic 8-inch scissor and have fabric, I've got them all laid out, I'd say it's my quilt. I've got everything layered, and I'm going to do kind of the final edge cuts, and I'm using scissors. Or if I've got a fabric pattern already laid out and pinned onto the fabric, often when you go to cut, you don't want to have that fabric lift up off the table because that risks all shifting of your things. So when I open the scissor, you can see the joint moves up, and the point where you can start all the way here, that's 2 inches up above the tabletop. Well, enter this scissor. Now, this scissor is designed with such an angle that when I open it, I can bring it all the way open and never have the joint leave the table. So this lets you have a cut which you hardly lift the fabric at all. you're only lifting that fabric to the height of the blade, which is almost nothing. So that's a handy dandy thing to do. If you don't like the spring of the easy action for some reason, there is a loop handle version that's got a nice comfortable loop handle that does the same thing, where that joint doesn't have to move, it doesn't have to be lifted, and you can still cut. And again, I'll point it out, here's razor edge, just like we were always talking about before. So you've got this tabletop cutting that is handy for when you are trying not to lift your fabric. So another technology, which is worth talking about, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with Fiskars, is forged scissors. Now, I say you wouldn't associate it with Fiskars, but did you know that Ginger is essentially our sister company? We are all under the same umbrella. Ginger scissors and Fiskars scissors, while being made at different factories, they have a lot of the same intelligence built in them. And I'm going to demonstrate some of those with some of the Ginger forged tools. So at Michael's, there's a variety of Ginger's tools, including a smaller 4-inch kind of a snip, where you've got very small loops, a pinker, they're shown in the middle, and then a 8-inch, standard 8-inch forged bent pair of scissors. Now, these are great for really long-lasting, durable tools. They're hefty. You feel the weight of them. You can feel that quality. And they are all metal. There's no plastic involved. Now, some people might feel that heft and think, wow, that's really durable. I like the heft and the weight. But other people, especially those with strength issues, might prefer a lighter weight tool. So there is a reason for both to exist. You've got the lighter weight kind of plastic handles, and then you've got the heavier weight, I would say more robust feeling forged tools that you could probably roll a truck over. Wouldn't recommend it, but something that's going to last you a lifetime. This chromed edge is going to stay sharp and stay durable for the lifetime. But in order to make even them a little bit less heavyweight than others, the loops of these handles have been more minimized. They are not, as you can kind of see, not as exaggeratedly contoured than a plastic pair of scissors. This does two things. One, it lightens it. The second thing is it makes it a little more ambidextrous. So a scissor like this is almost equally comfortable left-handed and right-handed because there is a lot less of that contouring. But that comes at a cost. The less contouring often means it feels a little harsher on your fingers as you're making especially heavy cuts through, say, denims or leathers or things like that, because there's less surface area that makes contact with your hand, so the pressure on your hand is a little bit higher. So it really is mostly about kind of a preference. They're both great pairs of scissors. These are hefty, they feel like high quality, and these are lightweight, and they have a little more of that contouring. But what about the cutting? How does that compare? Well, I will point out on the packaging, the Ginger scissors call out the word knife edge. Knife edge, what? Oh, knife edge. Turns out that is synonymous to the Fiskars razor edge. So when you see Ginger knife edge, think about that fact. And I will also point out, if I can get the reflection right, that whole edge is at that sharper 45-degree angle. So it's going to cut through that fabric in a very clean and consistent way. So high quality cutting all around. Ginger is great as well. Now, there are some other cool tools that I won't kind of capture within that same 8-inch bent scissor, but I definitely want to talk about because they are also going to satisfy some consumers, some of your needs when you're doing your sewing or quilting or other DIY type of activities and need a pair of scissors. And the first, I call them the cool tools. The first one I'll talk about is something I mentioned earlier on, is often you're doing what's called fussy cutting. That came up, that term has come up in the last 5 years, where people like to cut out decorative patterns out of their fabric so that they could then iron them in applique or use other adhesives, or if they're doing fabric wall hangings, We decorated our kids' bed with cutout pictures, and that was perfect example of fussy cutting. And if you're going to do that, one of the tools we definitely recommend for that sort of cutting is the easy action. You know, this fussy cutting is prone to a lot of repetitive, small little snips, and it can wear you out if you do it manually. Another we recommend is, of course, the classic storks. They have the advantage of very lightweight, and so that motion of the open and closed is not too rigorous on you, but sometimes people say these loops are maybe a little too small. Well, we do have an additional tool that we came out specifically for fussy cutting, and we call it the Total Control Scissors. And these look funny. So first of all, you might notice, hey, there's no loops. So there must be a spring, right? Because now we've learned if there's no loops, that means there's a spring, easy action. So these are easy action. And they even say under there, oh, it's hard with this camera, but they say easy action. This tool, you wrap your entire hand around the lower part so that you feel like you've got a great amount of control. It's something you can use your entire hand and its strength to keep a good grip on it that you never have to let go, as you're not just using your fingertips. But then to actuate it, you have a little lock and it opens, and you only have to move your thumb. And that thumb action right here, that's the strongest muscle in your hand. That thumb action is only using that very strong muscle. It'll let you do this fussy cutting for a longer period of time without fatiguing, and still have, because of the grip, nice control for you not to be able to have just fingertips usage, but you've got kind of that whole grip in there for you to do the fussy cutting. And hard to see here too, but this also says razor edge. So once again, we've got another razor edge tool for our cutting of fabrics. So this is another great little tool for maybe, admittedly, a smaller target of fussy cutting, but it's also great. It's a snip too, so it can be used in other things as well. The next cool tool, I'm sure you have, thread snips, but what I like to point out about these particular pairs of thread snips is there's two versions that we came out with in the last couple of years. And this first version is a very straightforward design. There's no spring in this other than the plastic loop itself. And it just opens and closes by that plastic flexing open and closed and creating that spring action. So you can grab it from pretty much anywhere, squeeze it, and be able to complete the cuts. This design is based on sheep shears, if you can believe it, from the 1700s, where it was a single piece of metal wrapped around with two blades on it, and it's bulletproof. You know, this will be able to snip forever, and it's nice sharp edges for you to snip all the threads you need in a very easy way. It also has a great big loop, which, interestingly, I really like to put my finger through. So I can do some snips and then let go, and then manipulate things and then just have it swing back, and it's always at hand. Now, if you don't want to have your finger through it, you can also put a string through it and tie it around a lanyard. People do that, and then it's always right there at hand when you're sitting at your sewing machine, for instance, to snip some threads. But there is a downside to this simplicity. And the simplicity here means that these blades are always open. And that might be something that you feel is a risk. You know, they aren't like needle sharp, but they're pointy. And, and it may make you feel a little uncomfortable. So we came out with the sister thread snip. This sister thread snip has a guard. You can see it's right here. That guard slides forward and locks it closed and protected. And so that's a simple pull back and you're ready to snip. It's got an orange button here that locks it forward, and it keeps it in such a way that it's going to protect that thread snip when it's not in use. So handy tool, handy innovation for within the thread snips, which again are generally pretty simple tools, but handy for those little extra things. The next innovation, cool tool, is not really about the function, but more about how you feel about the tool. Fiskars is known for orange. Yes, that's great. We have a trademark for the color orange. We're one of the few companies that have trademarked a color within a product line. And so if you see an orange pair of scissors, it better be Fiskars. If it's not, they're going to be in trouble because we have that trademark. And so orange is known for Fiskars. Unfortunately, orange is not always a very fashionable color. You know, so yes, it identifies Fiskars, but sometimes it doesn't fit with the motif of what you've got around you. And some people like maybe something a little more fashionable. And so we have come out with what's called the fashion colors. Fashion, and they are in a variety of colors to make it match your lifestyle. These are often limited edition. We put them out for a year at a time, sometimes less. And they usually have a theme. In this case, this is an ultra lilac, so it's kind of a nature type theme. And this one is a more of a green color, and it's definitely different. And there's also something really amazing about it, and I can point it out in the other video. It's glitter. It's filled with glitter, and it's so shiny. It's got a nice reflective surface, but right underneath that surface is a glitter just sparkle all over, which is very cool. But these are the same performance with a tried and true 8-inch classic bent orange pair of scissors. So you know they're going to be good. You know they're going to be comfortable. You know they're going to cut what you need, and you know they're going to last a really long time. So these are some extra pairs of scissors that you might want to decide that fit better with your lifestyle than the bright orange. So definitely take a look at that. There is another that fits right within there, and it's a folding pair of scissors. And I don't know if you've ever used or seen one of our folding pairs of scissors, but the handles fold back over the blades. They're pretty small snips, but it makes them TSA compliant, so you can take them on the airplane with you. I know my daughter loves to crochet, but she has to bring a pair of fingernail clippers in order to snip her threads because we didn't have one of these. Well, now we have one. Now she has one, and she can put that with her crochet material to snip the threads or the yarns when she's done with that. And so that's very handy. And now these come more than just orange, but also in this kind of lilac color as well. Excuse me. Another aspect that is not necessarily performance, but has come to the forefront, I would say more so in the last 5 years, would be the idea of sustainability within the products that we buy. And some people would think, well, plastics, we want to try and avoid plastics wherever we can. And the problem is engineering loves plastics. They're great products. It's really hard to wean ourselves from plastics. So the next best thing that we can do would be to utilize recycled materials or renewable materials. So we launched a set of scissors called Fiskars Renew, and they come in a nice packaging, recycled cardboard packaging, that the specific plastics that we've used is 2/3 recycled material, recycled plastic, and 1/3 cellulose, which cellulose is plant pulp. It's a plant matter, and it's embedded within it. And so much so, in fact, that sometimes you might even see occasionally a little bit of a blemish right on the top of this plastic. And in a way, I see this as character for within this plastic. You understand that this is being made in a more renewable way, in a way that's more sustainable. And if that's important to you, this is an entire line of 9-inch scissors, 8-inch scissors, and some snips that can satisfy that kind of the good feeling of being able to sustain the planet while still having a high quality pair of scissors that will last you forever. We make sure that these perform at the same quality of any other one of our scissors, but they just include that renewable and recycled material. So that's kind of a neat additional little tool. Now the final pair of scissors is another pair of 8-inch scissors, but it's my kind of only exception to what I would say would be a fabric associated scissors. And this is called the Power Cut shears. Now you can see these are not orange handled. Most of the time we put these in white handles to a little differentiate them from some of the other products. And they have funny shaped blades. And they call out specifically on them for tough cuts. Now, firstly, I'll point out that the handles themselves match very closely to our classic 8-inch. So if you like the feel of our orange handled scissors, you'll probably like the feel of these. But the magic comes from this blade. And the blade shape is designed in such a way that you actually have more power at the tip than you would with a standard pair of scissors. At the same time, they're the same cut length, they're the same overall length, but they are giving you additional power, especially at the tip, that we even say 2x more power at that tip. Now, more power doesn't mean you can just cut things that are thicker. which you can do, but it also means it makes it easier for you because it's more powerful. It can make a cut through a heavier material, say a leather. They show a leather there, or in this case, there's a cork shown there. That heavier material might be really hard to cut to the tip with a tool like a regular 8-inch. So I have an illustration board. This is a thick material that's often used for matting. If it's white, this is a recycled illustration board. It's backing of different things. Let me switch to the other view. This illustration board, I mean, I'm a fairly strong person, excuse me, but I can tell you, if I'm going to try and cut this illustration board, I can get about halfway through. I'm shaking. That I can't get all the way through this, and I only made it about halfway through the cut because it's a pretty thick material. But if I take this tool and I'm going to cut that same material, it will let me cut all the way to the edge, and it's a significant difference. You can feel that difference. Now, this isn't going to be for everybody. These blades are a little bit bigger. They're a little heavier. They have a little more fabric lift. But if what is important to you is the ability to make easier cuts or cut thicker things that you wouldn't be able to cut otherwise, these power cut shears are going to be tools that would really do the job well. I'm also proud to say that I invented this one, so I'm definitely going to give my seal of approval, but I hope that you can try these out sometime and really feel that difference. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so it's been almost 40 minutes, and I have one takeaway that we're going to talk about, and that's keeping your tools sharp. So Fiskars here, we're talking about scissors in general, and we're going to focus on that a little bit. But within sewing, especially quilting, rotary cutters often come up as well. If you look back, I have talked about rotary cutters several times with Michaels. If you go back to their YouTube, they're recorded. You can understand the basics of rotary cutters and why they're great. But in general, they're razor sharp pizza cutters used for cutting fabric on a cutting mat. And they're very, very sharp. So sometimes they can get dull. Additionally, sometimes scissors get dull, especially if you're cutting more abrasive materials. Sometimes you just can't help it. Or, after decades of use, they're starting to wear down a little bit. So how can we keep our tools sharp? Blade sharpening is what I'm asked a lot. Can I sharpen the blades of my scissors? Can I sharpen a rotary cutter blade? And to answer that very simply, from a rotary cutter blade standpoint, no. You should not sharpen your rotary cutter blades. There are some products out on the market, not Fiskars, that purport to sharpen rotary cutter blades. But I can tell you from experience of trying all of these tools, they've never helped. A rotary blade, when you're cutting through a long length of thing, is cutting at every point along that circle. And if anywhere along that circle has a nick or a duller spot, then when you're cutting across the fabric, you've left threads. Even if 99% of your blade is very sharp, if there's just 1% that is just a little less sharp, that is in general considered a dull blade. These tools will not get that 1% that's dull back to sharp. In fact, it'll take the other 99% and it'll bring it down. So in general, rotary cutters are the sharpest blades Fiskars makes. They should not be sharpened, not just for the usefulness, but also because they're kind of dangerous. And you try and use some of these sharpening tools and you might get hurt. So we don't recommend ever sharpening rotary cutter blades. On the other hand, scissors blades definitely can be sharpened. Now, scissor sharpeners won't work miracles. If you've got a scissor blade that you tried to cut through a pin and you really ranked down on that and you got a little nick in there, no amount of help will be able to recover that spot, unfortunately. But what it can do is take a blade that you've used over its life, not abused, just used, and now its performance has gone down, and it'll bring that performance back up. Now, it won't bring it back to brand new, but it'll bring it, I like to say, it'll take a 60% blade back to 90%. It'll improve that performance. And sometimes that's all you need is just a little bit more, little tuning, little fine tuning with a sharpener in order to improve the performance. Fiskars does have a sharpener, and it's a very simple to use sharpener. You take it, it's got two edges that you can see that they're oriented with the blades. You can hold it on the white side. You can either do it on a tabletop or up in air, and you have two options. One, you can close the tips on it and push through and open it, or what I prefer is open it way back here and squeeze the blades through. Either way, you're going to roll a new edge to those edges of that grind that we talked about, that 30-degree grind, and it's going to be able to renew that. Now, I do have to mention, because it was brought up prior to this, what about lefties? What happens? Well, when you're a lefty, you hold the scissors with your left hand, right? Which means you're going to hold the sharpener with your right hand, which turns the sharpener the other way and reorients it to the left-handed scissor. So now it's appropriately oriented to the lefty. So this will work both for left-handed and right-handed scissors. But wait, Dan, we talked about razor edge a whole bunch. What happens when I try and use a razor edge pair of scissors that doesn't have a 30-degree grind in a scissor sharpener? Well, in general, here's the caveat. In general, most inexpensive scissor sharpeners will ruin your razor edge. It's going to try and take that 45-degree angle and make it a 30. And it's just going to roll that edge right over and wear it out too quickly. So you don't want to use an inexpensive kind of, sometimes you can get them, they look like little plastic things with a little ceramic bar in it. If you've got a razor edge, you have to be very careful not to do those, otherwise you'll ruin them. But this tool, this is what's called the Fiskars Universal Scissor Sharpener, and it even says ideal for standard right, left-handed scissors plus razor edge shears. Now the trick behind this one, and I'm going to switch to the other camera so we can look closer, is these ceramic pieces that are in here that are doing the sharpening are not a fixed rod. These ceramic pieces are on little, let's orient it, are on moving little carriages that as you put a razor edge pair of scissors in here, the carriages line them right up to the angle of the blade. They don't care if it's razor edge or standard. It automatically adjusts itself to sharpen it properly. So with this universal scissor sharpener, that's a tool that you can use to sharpen anything in your collection, and it's not going to ruin anything. But those inexpensive ones, you got to watch out because they're not going to work for razor edge. So be aware of that. All right, going back to my presentation. Uh-oh, where'd it go? There it is. Oh, it didn't show up. All right, so we're going to stick to this for a second. Oh, I'm sorry. Embarrassing. Technology, not shifting to the right thing. There it is. Nope, we're just going to close this view. Okay. There it is. Sorry about that. But that actually takes us to the final slide, which is just a quick thank you with the last few minutes of the presentation. I appreciate your time, and I'm very glad that you were able to join me with this school. And now is the opportunity, with it looks like about 15 minutes left in our presentation time, to ask some questions. Maybe you already have in the chat. I haven't been watching. But if Tiffany wasn't able to answer any of them, now is the time for someone to kind of ask me those questions, and I'm able to answer them. So thank you for your time. What questions do we have?
All right, Dan. So we have a question from Celeste, which is, which scissors are good for cutting aluminum sheets?
Ooh, aluminum sheets. So that's a great question. And it often depends on what thickness of aluminum. I'm going to guess you're talking about like cooking aluminum, where it's thin but not too thick. If you're talking about real thick aluminum, Fiskars does make, we call them hardware shears, and they're great big scissors that are intended for cutting metal. They're a little more masculine looking, and you'll find them in the hardware section of different stores. I'm not sure Michaels carries those particular tools, but what Michaels does carry, and this will give me a good opportunity to talk about them, is this is a tool that is a pretty standard 8-inch scissor, but it's got this gold blade. And what's going on with this gold blade? So this gold blade is called a titanium nitride coating. This titanium nitride is an extra hard material that is plated, is chemically bonded right onto the edge of the blade to make that edge, that edge that we've sharpened to that 30-degree angle, extra hard. And that means it's extra durable. So when you're cutting aluminum, even thin aluminum, it will wear down other scissors a little bit faster than you would fabrics or papers because it's metal on metal. But if you take a pair of scissors that have a titanium nitride coating, and titanium nitride comes gold like this, this will make the edges more durable and be able to hold up against those aluminums for a much longer time. So definitely recommend, if you like the style of the classic 8-inch bent, but you want something a little more durable, that titanium nitride edge would be what I would recommend.
All right, Dan,
Glad you
our
asked.
next...
I was able to pull this one out.
All right, Dan, so our next question is, which pair of scissors would be best for light fabrics that will not make the fabric shift while cutting?
Light fabrics. Okay, so in general, the first step would be look for something that's razor edge. Razor edge is going to do better than a standard on a lighter fabric because it's going to have kind of a cleaner cut. And if you don't want the material to shift, that's where I would call back this guy, either this one or the easy action version, the ones that are the tabletop scissors. Both of these that I'm showing are razor edge, and they're the ones that I would recommend because if you don't want them to shift, you want to disturb it as little as possible. So you want that blade to stay as flat to the tabletop as you can. Now these are actually also great if you're cutting on like a carpet or something. Because then you can even push this down a little bit into the carpet and slide it under the fabric, and so it's disturbed even less. Now, you kind of run the risk of hitting some of your fabric or some of your carpet fibers, so maybe not a great idea, but I have done it in a pinch. But yeah, this would be a razor edge first, and then second would be a tool that has that less lift, like a tabletop version.
That's all I've got, Dan.
Oh, well, perfect. No, that's great. It looks like there was a little bit of chat going on, and hopefully Tiffany was also able to answer any that maybe came up earlier, but I appreciate your time. I hope that along the way you learned some of the tips or some of the tricks that the engineers can add to scissors to make them work better in certain instances than others. And I hope you take them away with some of those technologies like razor edge, easy action, the tabletop, and even Amplify. If you remember back to Amplify being the one that'll keep those blades pinched together at all points. Now, when you see those things on shelf, you'd be like, I remember Dan talked about that. Okay. So I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to have been able to present to you. Thank you all for coming.